was a quiet afternoon when Edward Hayes, a retired detective, decided to spend the day cleaning out his late mother's house. She had passed away several years ago, leaving behind a house full of memories. It wasn't unusual for Edward to return to the house. After all, it had been his childhood home, and there were moments when the walls seemed to whisper his name. But that day felt different. The house was older now, the paint peeling from the windowsills, the floorboards creaking in protest as he moved through the rooms. Edward had never been one to shy away from difficult tasks, but today, as he sifted through the clutter in the attic, something caught his eye. A small wooden box tucked away in a corner behind some old furniture. It was old, the wood worn down by years of neglect, but it seemed out of place among the dusty relics of forgotten years. It wasn't big, just a simple rectangular box sealed with a faded ribbon, yet something about it piqued his curiosity. He carefully pulled the box from its hiding spot and set it on the floor. His hands were steady, but a sense of unease crept over him as he untied the ribbon. As the ribbon loosened, a rush of musty air filled the room, and for a moment Edward wondered what he might find inside. Could it be a forgotten family heirloom? A relic of his mother's past? His thoughts raced as he opened the lid. A relic of his mother's past. His thoughts raced as he opened the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, neatly tied together with more string. Each letter was carefully folded, their edges yellowed with age. They were written on thick, high-quality paper, and the handwriting was elegant, a delicate script that seemed both familiar and foreign. Edward paused for a moment, unsure of what to do. These letters were clearly old, possibly decades old. Could they hold the key to something important? His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for the first letter. The first thing that caught his attention was the name written at the top of the letter, Amelia. It was a name he recognized, though only faintly. He had heard it in passing, perhaps during a family gathering or a conversation with an older relative. But who was she? And why had his mother kept these letters? As he flipped through the stack, he noticed the letters were addressed to someone named Thomas. The more he read, the more he realized that these letters weren't just casual notes. They were expressions of deep love, each one brimming with longing and passion. Edward's curiosity grew stronger with every word he read. It became clear that Amelia and Thomas had been deeply involved in some sort of romantic relationship, one that had endured despite time and distance. But there was something unsettling about the letters, something he couldn't quite place. They were filled with a sadness, a sense of impending loss that lingered in the words. The last letter in the stack, dated just days before Thomas disappeared, was the most poignant. Amelia's words were filled with desperate affection, but also with an undeniable sense of fear. "If you love me, leave," she wrote. "For your safety, leave before they come for you." The letter was signed with a single word, Amelia. Edward felt a cold chill run through him as he read the final line. Something about these letters didn't sit right. His instincts, honed over decades of investigating crime scenes, told him that there was more to this story than he could understand. He felt an unshakable compulsion to uncover the truth. Who was Thomas? What had happened to him? And why had his mother kept these letters hidden away for so long? As Edward sat there in the dimly lit attic, holding the letters in his hands, he knew one thing for certain. These pieces of paper were more than just a love story. They were a clue, a key to a mystery that had been buried for years, waiting to be uncovered. Edward spent the next few days obsessively poring over the letters. He couldn't shake the feeling that they held a deeper, darker truth, one tied to his family's history. His mother had always been a private woman, never talking much about her past, and Edward had never thought to ask. She had raised him with love and care, but there were parts of her life that seemed shrouded in mystery. Why had she kept these letters hidden for so many years? And why had she never spoken of Amelia or Thomas? Determined to learn more, Edward began his search by looking through old family records. He visited the local library, digging through yellowed newspapers and town records, hoping to find any mention of Thomas Blackwell. His search led him to an article from 1945, a year that stood out as pivotal in the history of Willow Creek. The article was brief but chilling. It had reported the disappearance of a man named Thomas Blackwell, a local war hero who had returned from the battlefield only to vanish without a trace. According to the report, Thomas had been in a passionate relationship with a woman named Amelia, but after his disappearance, Amelia was never heard from again. The investigation into his vanishing was short-lived, and the case went cold. No one in Willow Creek seemed to know what had happened to him, and the article's tone suggested that Thomas's disappearance had been swept under the rug by the town's more influential residents. For years, Thomas's story was nothing more than a tragic footnote, a mystery that no one could or would solve. Edward felt a growing sense of dread as he continued to read. This wasn't just the story of a missing man. It was something far more complex. Amelia's letters, which seemed so innocent at first, now appeared to be a breadcrumb trail leading to a much darker reality. He had already connected the name Amelia to his own family, but there was more to it than just that. The deeper he dug into the past, the more he realized that his mother had known about the events surrounding Thomas's disappearance, and perhaps had been involved in some way. Determined to find answers, Edward reached out to a few of the town's older residents. He spoke with Clara, the town historian, who had lived in Willow Creek for most of her life. Clara remembered Amelia and Thomas well. She recalled that Amelia had been an enigmatic figure, always quiet and reserved, yet her presence had a certain weight to it. According to Clara, Amelia had disappeared from Willow Creek shortly after Thomas vanished. Rumors had circulated, but no one could confirm what had happened. Some said she had left to start a new life elsewhere, while others whispered that she had been driven mad by grief over Thomas's disappearance. Clara didn't know much more, but she gave Edward a crucial piece of information. Amelia's family home, a large, dilapidated house at the edge of town, had been abandoned for years. No one had dared to live there since Amelia's disappearance. Clara mentioned that the house had been in disrepair long before it was abandoned, and no one had ever seemed interested in restoring it. Edward felt a sudden urgency to visit the house. There was something about the idea of searching through the old forgotten space that tugged at him. He made his way to the house the following weekend, his heart pounding with anticipation. When he arrived, the house looked just as Clara had described it. Forgotten and decaying, a relic of the past. The windows were boarded up, the yard overgrown with weeds. It looked like no one had stepped foot on the property in decades. Inside, the house was even more haunting. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew, and the floors creaked under Edward's weight as he walked through the dark, silent halls. He felt a chill crawl up his spine as he moved toward the attic. When he opened the door, the sight that greeted him took his breath away. There, sitting untouched, was another box, identical to the one he had found in his mother's attic. His fingers shook as he reached for it, knowing that inside, more answers awaited. Edward's investigation into the letters from Amelia deepened with each passing day. As he read more about the mysterious love affair between her and Thomas, he began to sense a connection to something darker, something his family had never discussed. His first stop was the town's archives. where he searched through local records in hopes of finding more information on Thomas Blackwell, the man from the letters. What he found was both fascinating and troubling. Thomas was a local war hero, widely respected in the town for his service during World War II. He had come back home a changed man, haunted by his experiences. But something more sinister lurked behind the accolades. A newspaper article from 1945 detailed his sudden disappearance. The report was brief, stating that Thomas had gone missing one night without a trace. The police at the time had no solid leads and eventually labeled it an unsolved case. It was said that his fiancée, Amelia, had been devastated. No one in town had heard from her after that, and rumors spread that she had left the area, disappearing just like Thomas. Edward sat in the dusty library, scanning the faded article. The connection between the two, the letters and the disappearance, was becoming clearer. If Amelia had disappeared after Thomas, it was possible she had known something, had seen something that forced her to leave. But the most puzzling part was his mother's role in all of this. Edward knew that his mother had been very close to Amelia as a child, and yet she had never once mentioned Thomas or his disappearance. The mystery deepened when Edward managed to track down an elderly woman named Clara, a former neighbor of his mother's family. Clara had been friends with both Amelia and his mother when they were younger. Her memories were faint, but she recalled hearing whispers about the disappearance. What Clara said next made Edward's blood run cold. She mentioned something about a secret society in the town, a powerful group of influential families who seemed to control everything behind the scenes. Edward's mind raced. Could there be a connection between this secret group and the disappearance of Thomas? Determined to learn more, Edward visited the old family home that once belonged to Amelia and her family. The house was abandoned now, left to decay over the years, but Edward felt drawn to it. As he walked through the house, it was as though he could feel the weight of the past pressing in on him. The floorboards creaked under his weight, the air thick with dust and neglect. He ventured into the attic, where he found another sealed box, much like the one he had discovered in his mother's house. Inside the box, Edward found more letters from Thomas himself. These were different, filled with fear and desperation. In one, Thomas wrote about his growing concerns for his safety. He had uncovered something disturbing, something that threatened not just his life, but the lives of those he cared about. In his last letter, Thomas mentioned that he was planning to leave town. He had learned enough to destroy the secret society, and he was determined to expose them, no matter the cost. It became painfully clear that Thomas's disappearance wasn't accidental. He had been silenced, likely by those who held the strings of power in Willow Creek. The town, it seemed, was built on more than just quiet streets and good people. Behind the facades, there was a network of secrets that had been hidden for generations. The more Edward uncovered, the more he realized that his own family had been caught in the web of deceit, unwilling or unable to speak the truth for fear of what might happen. The hidden truth was coming to the surface, and with it, Edward's understanding of his family's involvement in a tragedy that had been buried for decades. It was no longer just about solving a mystery. It was about confronting a dark history that had shaped the lives of everyone in Willow Creek. As Edward's investigation into Thomas Blackwell's disappearance deepened, the pieces of the puzzle began to form a much darker picture than he had ever imagined. What had started as a simple curiosity about a long-lost love story had morphed into a labyrinth of secrets and betrayals. The more he uncovered, the more the shadowy presence of a secret society loomed over everything. However, it was a group that had shaped the course of Willow Creek's history, wielding power in ways that most people had never realized and perhaps never wanted to. Edward found more and more references to this elusive group, but no one seemed willing to talk openly about it. People were either too afraid or too loyal to risk their reputations by speaking out. Clara, the elderly neighbor, had been the first to mention the society, but even she had spoken in hushed tones, as if fearful of retribution. As Edward dug deeper, he started to connect the dots between the group and the town's wealthiest and most influential families, those who had always seemed to hold the reins of power in Willow Creek. The secret society's origins dated back to the early 1900s, when a small group of wealthy landowners and businessmen had come together under the guise of charity work, but in reality their goals were far more sinister. Their influence stretched across the town, controlling everything from local politics to the economy, and they had built an ironclad network that ensured their secrets remained safe. Any potential threats to their power, anyone who might expose their misdeeds, was quickly silenced. Edward's heart raced as he sifted through the old files he had found in the town archives. There were whispers of a brotherhood that extended far beyond the borders of Willow Creek, its members bound by blood oaths and shared interests. These men, and sometimes women, were not only interested in money and power, but in protecting their dark pasts. They had their hands in everything from illegal trade to organized crime, and they used their influence to crush anyone who dared to challenge them. It was becoming increasingly clear that Thomas Blackwell had stumbled upon something dangerous, something that could have exposed the Brotherhood's operations. The more Edward read about Thomas's final days, the more it seemed that Thomas had uncovered a hidden truth about the society's activities, and he was preparing to expose it. Amelia's letters had hinted at his growing fears, and now Edward understood why. Thomas had become a threat, and like all threats to the society, he had been eliminated. But the more disturbing revelation came when Edward began to piece together his family's involvement. His mother, who had grown up with Amelia, had known more than she had ever let on. She had been part of the same tight-knit social circle, but her ties to the Brotherhood went deeper than Edward could have ever imagined. Amelia had entrusted her with the letters and the truth, urging her to keep the secret to protect the family. Edward's mother had kept those letters hidden away, not just to preserve her own peace, but to safeguard their family from the same fate that had befallen Thomas. The realization hit Edward like a punch to the gut. His family, the people he had trusted, had been complicit in a network of corruption and fear. They had known about the Brotherhood, and they had done nothing to stop it. In fact, they had been part of it. Amelia's disappearance, Thomas's death, these were not random events. They were the result of a ruthless machine that operated under the guise of respectability. As Edward's investigation reached its peak, he felt as if he were standing at the edge of an abyss. The more he uncovered, the less he felt he could trust the world around him. Everyone in Willow Creek had been touched by the society's influence, whether they knew it or not. And the further Edward dug, the more he realized that his own life might be in danger if he kept pushing for the truth. The Brotherhood had once silenced Thomas. Who was to say they wouldn't do the same to him? The dark web of deceit had been carefully constructed over generations, and Edward now found himself caught in its tangled threads, uncertain of how far it stretched, or how much of the truth he could survive uncovering. Edward's obsession with the truth had consumed him. What had begun as a curiosity about his mother's connection to Amelia and Thomas Blackwell had grown into a relentless pursuit of justice. As he uncovered more about the Brotherhood and the sinister forces that had shaped Willow Creek, he began to realize how deeply his own family was entangled in this web of corruption. The deeper he dug, the more dangerous his search became. He started receiving anonymous warnings, letters slipped under his door, phone calls late at night, all telling him the same thing: stop digging or you'll be the next to disappear. Edward's mind raced. The final clues were starting to fall into place. He knew, without a doubt, that his mother had been hiding something more than just the letters. There had to be more to Thomas's death, more to the Brotherhood's secrets, and more to the silence that had enveloped the town for so many years. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him as he pieced together the puzzle. Every step forward only seemed to lead him further into a labyrinth of lies. One evening, while going through his mother's old letters again, Edward found something unexpected. Hidden at the bottom of a drawer, buried among old receipts and forgotten trinkets, was a letter from his mother addressed to him. The envelope was sealed and the handwriting was unmistakably hers. His heart skipped a beat. This was it. This was the letter he had been waiting for, the one that would explain everything. He opened it with trembling hands, but as he read the words, the world around him seemed to collapse. In the letter, his mother confessed everything. She revealed that she had known the full extent of the Brotherhood's power in Willow Creek, and she had been part of it all along. But what shocked Edward most was the final revelation. His mother had been one of the key players in the events leading up to Thomas's disappearance. Amelia had trusted her with the truth, and his mother had betrayed that trust. She had helped cover up Thomas's death, helping to hide the body and keep the secret buried. She had done it not out of loyalty to the Brotherhood, but to protect her family, Edward's family, from the ruthless consequences that would have followed any attempt to expose the truth. She had contributed, of course, to the identification process and the research. Edward felt a surge of betrayal and disbelief. His mother, the woman he had trusted more than anyone, had been involved in something so dark, so unforgivable. Yet, as he read on, the letter took an even more disturbing turn. His mother confessed that she had kept the letters from Amelia and Thomas not just to protect him, but because she had feared for his life. She had known that the Brotherhood would stop at nothing to keep their secrets safe. The final lines of the letter were a chilling warning. "You've stirred the hornet's nest, Edward. If you continue, you will be next." Suddenly everything clicked into place. The anonymous threats, the warnings, the sense of danger that had followed him for weeks. Edward wasn't just investigating a decades-old crime anymore. He had uncovered something much bigger. The Brotherhood hadn't just been involved in a small-town conspiracy. They had extended their influence into every corner of the town, and they had kept it hidden for generations. But now, with the truth coming to light, they would stop at nothing to silence him. It was then that Edward realized the full extent of the price he would have to pay for uncovering the truth. His mother had kept the secret to protect him, but now he understood that no one was safe. The Brotherhood had always been watching, always waiting for the moment when someone would dare challenge their power. And now Edward had become that someone. As he sat there, holding the letter in his hands, he knew there was no turning back. He had opened Pandora's box, and the consequences were about to unfold in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The final twist in this long-forgotten mystery wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about surviving long enough to expose it. Edward's decision to release his findings set a series of events in motion that would change his life and the town of Willow Creek forever. He knew that by exposing the dark secrets of the Brotherhood, he was tearing down everything he had once believed about his home. The documents, the letters, the truth, it was all out in the open now. But the moment the information hit the public, it felt like a dam had broken, and the flood of consequences followed quickly in its wake. The backlash was immediate. The media descended upon Willow Creek, and soon after, so did strangers. Investigators, journalists, and outsiders seeking answers to questions that had long been ignored. But with a flood of attention came silence, too. The very people who had supported him, those he had counted on, began to distance themselves. The fear was palpable. In the face of the truth, the town closed ranks. Local authorities gave conflicting statements, and some residents seemed to have vanished altogether. It wasn't long before Edward realized the full extent of the Brotherhood's reach. The power they wielded wasn't just local, it stretched further than he had ever anticipated. Those in charge had made it clear they were untouchable, and they would ensure that Edward, the one who had dared to expose them, would pay the price. The final toll wasn't just personal. Edward's reputation, his career, everything he had worked for had been destroyed. His search for justice had come at the cost of his own life, his own peace. And as the years passed, Willow Creek returned to its quiet, picturesque existence. But the shadow of the past never truly left. The people had accepted the silence, the lies. In the end, Edward was left to contemplate the hollow victory of truth, knowing that some secrets are meant to stay buried, and some lives are never the same after the truth is unleashed.